The red warning lights flashed across the command bridge of the Eternal Dominion as Admiral Kexmora stared at the impossible readings on his tactical display. His four eyes, enhanced with cybernetic implants, struggled to process what the sensors were telling him. A void of space that had been empty moments before now teemed with massive energy signatures that defied everything the Galactic Empire knew about hyperspace travel. "Report," Kexmora barked at his communications officer, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had crushed a dozen rebellions across the galaxy. "Admiral, we're detecting massive hyperspace distortions in Sector 779. The energy readings are impossible, sir. They're generating power levels that exceed our theoretical maximums by a factor of 10. Kexmora's scaled hands gripped the command rail as he watched the main view screen. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear, revealing glimpses of swirling energy that hurt to look at directly. Then, as if reality had been folded and unfolded like paper, they appeared. The human fleet materialized in perfect formation. Hundreds of vessels emerging from the hyperspace breach with a precision that made the Imperial Navy's best maneuvers look clumsy. Each ship was a work of art and engineering that the Empire had never seen before. Their hulls gleamed with a strange luminescence that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. And their designs were both elegant and menacing. "By the Ancient Ones," whispered Commander Vextel, the ship's tactical officer. "Admiral, those vessels ... They're not in our databases. We have no record of this technology, this species, or these ship designs." Kexmora felt something he hadn't experienced in his 2 centuries of military service. Genuine fear. The Galactic Empire had ruled over 17,000 star systems for 300 years. They had encountered every spacefaring species in known space, cataloged their technologies, and either conquered them or brought them into the Empire's fold. The Empire's vast databases contained information on millions of species, their capabilities, their weaknesses, and their histories. But these ships were completely unknown. The lead vessel was particularly impressive and terrifying. It was a dreadnought that dwarfed even the Eternal Dominion, the pride of the Imperial fleet. Its sleek design suggested speed and maneuverability that should have been impossible for something so massive. Energy readings from its hull indicated defensive systems that the Empire's weapons might not be able to penetrate. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel," reported the communications officer, his voice shaking slightly. "Put it through," Kexmora ordered, straightening his military uniform and preparing to face whatever this new threat might be. The main screen flickered and displayed the bridge of the alien vessel. The being who appeared was startlingly similar to the primitive species from Southry that the Empire had designated for eventual colonization. But this creature wore the uniform of what was clearly a military commander. And his eyes held the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "This is Admiral Ginwu of the Terran Federation," the being said, speaking perfect galactic standard without any accent or translation delay. "We request an audience with your Emperor. We come in peace, but we come prepared." Kexmora's mind raced. The Salthri system was marked in Imperial records as containing a primitive species that had barely developed spaceflight. According to the last survey conducted 50 years ago, they were still confined to their home planet and a few crude stations around their star. How had they developed this impossible technology? How had they built a fleet that could appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning? "I am Admiral Kexmora of the Imperial Navy," he replied, his voice steady despite his growing unease. "By what authority do you enter Imperial space without permission? Your species is classified as pre-space flight in our records." Ginwu smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and deeply unsettling. "Your records are somewhat out of date, Admiral. We've been watching your empire for quite some time. We know about your expansion patterns, your military capabilities, and your treatment of species you consider inferior." The implications of those words hit Kexmora like a physical blow. If this human was telling the truth, then the Empire's intelligence networks had failed completely. How long had these beings been watching them? How much did they know about Imperial military secrets? "We've decided it's time for a conversation," Jinwu continued. "We're not here to fight, but we're prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. We simply want to talk." Kexmora looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet. Even his enhanced mind couldn't calculate odds against technology he didn't understand. The smart choice would be to contact the Emperor immediately and let the political leaders handle this situation. But something in the human admiral's manner suggested that this is just the beginning of changes that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Empire. "Stand by," Kexmora said finally. "I'm contacting Imperial Command." As the transmission ended, the Admiral stared at the impossible fleet floating in space before him, wondering if the Empire's 3 centuries of dominance were about to come to an end. Emperor Morvac, the Eternal, sat upon his throne of crystallized starlight, his ancient form barely visible beneath layers of ceremonial armor that had been forged from the metals of 1,000 conquered worlds. For over 2,000 years he had ruled the Galactic Empire with absolute authority, his mind enhanced by cybernetic implants that connected him to every corner of his vast domain. It processed countless threats, rebellions, and diplomatic challenges. But never in his long existence had he felt the strange sensation that now crept through his consciousness. Genuine surprise. The massive audience chamber aboard his personal flagship, Imperial Majesty, was a testament to the Empire's power. The walls were lined with trophies from defeated civilizations, and the floor was made from polished stone taken from the homeworlds of species that had dared to resist Imperial rule. Representatives from dozens of member species stood in perfect formation along the sides of the chamber, their heads bowed in respect for their eternal ruler. But today, something was different. The reports from Admiral Kexmora had shaken the very foundations of what the Emperor thought he knew about the galaxy. The Sol 3 system was nothing more than a footnote in the Imperial archives, a small notation about a primitive species that had barely learned to use fire when the Empire last surveyed them. According to the records, they were scheduled for eventual colonization once they had evolved sufficiently to be useful as servants. Now, these same primitives claimed to have technology that surpassed the Empire's greatest achievements. "Your Eternal Majesty," announced Grand Vizier Thexara, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The human delegation has arrived at the outer perimeter of the fleet. They request permission to board." Morvac's cybernetic implants processed thousands of tactical scenarios in mere seconds. Every calculation suggested that allowing unknown aliens aboard his personal vessel was strategically unsound. But his curiosity, a trait that had served him well during his rise to power, demanded answers. "Grant them permission," he commanded, "but maintain full security protocols. I want to see what these ... humans are truly capable of." The Emperor's inner circle, composed of his most trusted advisors and military commanders, exchanged nervous glances. General Kexamoran, commander of the Imperial Guard, shifted uncomfortably in his ceremonial armor. Chancellor Vextel, the Empire's chief diplomat, reviewed his notes on species contact protocols with obvious anxiety. Moments later, the impossible happened. Without any visible means of transportation, without any ships docking or airlocks opening, 3 figures simply materialized in the center of the audience chamber. The air itself seemed to shimmer and bend, and suddenly they were there, as if they had always been standing in that exact spot. The Emperor's enhanced vision immediately focused on the central figure. The being appeared to be from the Sol 3 species, but everything about him radiated confidence and authority. He wore a simple military uniform that somehow managed to look more impressive than the elaborate ceremonial dress of the Empire's highest officials. His eyes surveyed the chamber with the calm assessment of someone who had seen power before and was unimpressed by its display. "I am Admiral Jin Wu of the Terran Federation," the human said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Without any apparent amplification, "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Your Majesty." The casual tone sent ripples of shock through the assembled representatives. No one spoke to Emperor Morvac, the Eternal, with such familiarity. Even his closest advisors addressed him with elaborate titles and formal language. Yet this primitive from a backwater planet spoke as if he were greeting an equal. "You claim to represent the species from Sol 3, Morvac replied, his voice carrying the weight of 2 millennia of absolute authority. "Our records indicate that your people have barely achieved spaceflight. How do you explain your presence here and the technology you've demonstrated? Jinwoo smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both respectful and slightly amused. Your imperial records are somewhat outdated, Your Majesty. The last survey of our system was conducted 50 years ago by an automated probe. Many things have changed since then. The human admiral gestured to his companions. A female officer who carried herself with military precision and an older man whose calm demeanor suggested scientific expertise. This is Commander Myung, our diplomatic specialist, and Dr. Hyunzik, our chief technology advisor. We've come to discuss the future of our relationship with your empire. General Kexamoran stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon.
Your Majesty, this is highly irregular.
Why are we highly roar? I don't. I cross it. Demonstrated technology that threatens imperial security. It should be detained for questioning. Jinwoo's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested that the general's threat was about as concerning to him as the buzzing of an insect. We understand your caution, General, but we're here to talk, not to threaten. We've been observing your empire for quite some time, and we believe it's time for a conversation. The implications of his words sent a chill through the chamber. If these humans had been watching the empire, studying its movements and capabilities, then imperial security had failed on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. Observing us. Chancellor Vexthel asked, his voice tight with concern.
For
how long, and from where? Dr. Hyunzik stepped forward slightly. We've been monitoring galactic affairs for approximately 800 years, Chancellor. We've established research stations and observation posts throughout this region of space. We've watched your expansion, studied your methods, and learned. About your treatment of the species you encounter, the silence that followed was deafening. 800 years of observation meant that everything the Empire thought it knew about its own security was wrong. Emperor Morvac. Ace ancient eyes narrowed. As he studied the three humans standing before his throne, his cybernetic implants hummed with activity, analyzing every detail of their appearance, their technology, and their impossible presence in his most secure chamber. The claim that they had been watching his empire for 800 years was either the most elaborate deception he had ever encountered or the most terrifying intelligence failure in imperial history. You speak of observation and monitoring, the Emperor said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 millennia of absolute rule. But words are easily spoken. If you truly possess the capabilities you claim, provide proof. Admiral Jinwoo's smile remained unchanged, as if he had been expecting this exact challenge. Without any visible signal or command, he raised his hand and made a simple gesture. The air in the center of the audience chamber began to shimmer and bend, and suddenly a massive three-dimensional holographic display materialized above the assembled crowd. The hologram showed a star map of incredible detail and scope, but this was not the galaxy as the Empire understood it. The familiar territories that had been conquered and ruled for centuries appeared as a relatively small cluster of systems, surrounded by vast networks of installations, colonies, and structures that bore no resemblance to imperial architecture. This is the galaxy as we see it, Jinwoo explained, his voice carrying easily through the stunned silence of the chamber. The yellow regions represent your empire's current territory. The blue areas show human colonies, research stations, and defensive installations. The Emperor's enhanced vision processed the implications of the display with growing alarm. The Empire's territory, which he had always believed, dominated the known galaxy. appeared as nothing more than a small island surrounded by an ocean of human expansion. Thousands of star systems that Imperial surveys had marked as uninhabited or primitive showed clear signs of advanced civilization. "Impossible," whispered General Kexmoran, his voice barely audible. "Our deep space sensors would have detected such massive construction projects. Our scouts would have reported these installations." Dr. Hyansik stepped forward, manipulating the holographic display with simple hand gestures. "Your scouts and sensors detect what they're designed to find, General. We've been using technology that operates outside the parameters of your detection systems. While your empire expanded inward, conquering and assimilating existing civilizations, we expanded outward into the unexplored regions of the galaxy." The display zoomed in on specific sectors, showing human colonies that had been established on worlds the Empire had never even surveyed. Massive space stations orbited stars that Imperial astronomers had classified as uninhabitable. Networks of communication relays and defensive platforms stretched across regions of space that the Empire's maps marked as empty void. "We've been out here for 800 years, Jinwu continued, his tone conversational despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "We've mapped 40% of the galaxy. We've established peaceful relations with over 300 species that your empire has never encountered. We've built cities on worlds you've never seen and formed alliances with civilizations you don't know exist." Chancellor Vexel, the Empire's chief diplomat, stared at the display with obvious distress. "These species, if they exist, why haven't they made contact with the Empire? Why haven't they sought trade agreements or territorial negotiations?" Commander Myung, the female officer who had accompanied Jinwu, spoke for the first time. "Because we advised them not to. We've been monitoring your Empire's expansion methods, Chancellor. We've seen how you treat species you consider inferior. We've watched you conquer, enslave, and destroy civilizations that couldn't defend themselves. We decided it was better to help these species develop quietly, away from Imperial attention." The implications of her words sent a chill through the assembled representatives. If the humans had been actively working to prevent contact between the Empire and other species, then Imperial expansion had been deliberately limited and controlled without the Empire's knowledge. Emperor Morvac's cybernetic implants processed thousands of tactical scenarios, each one more disturbing than the last. "You claim to have this vast network of allies and installations," he said finally. "But any species can create false holographic displays. How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception?" Jinwu nodded as if he had expected this question. He gestured to Lieutenant Sujin, a young woman who had remained silent throughout the encounter. She stepped forward and activated a small device that she wore on her wrist. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Every weapon in the audience chamber simply stopped working. Imperial guards who had been standing ready with their energy rifles suddenly found themselves holding useless pieces of metal and plastic. The weapons' power indicators went dark. Their targeting systems failed. Their trigger mechanisms became completely unresponsive. But the effect went beyond just weapons. The cybernetic implants that enhanced the vision and hearing of half the people in the chamber began to flicker and dim. The ceremonial armor worn by the Emperor's elite guard lost its powered enhancement systems. Even the sophisticated communication devices that connected the chamber to the rest of the Imperial fleet fell silent. "This is a localized entropy field," Ginwu explained, his voice remaining calm and conversational despite the panic that was beginning to spread through the chamber. "It temporarily disrupts the quantum interactions that power your technology. The field affects all electronic systems within a 50-meter radius." General Kexamoran frantically pulled the trigger of his ceremonial sidearm, but the weapon remained dead and lifeless in his hands. Around the chamber, other officials touched their malfunctioning implants and devices with growing alarm. "Don't worry, Jinwu," continued with a slight smile. "The effects are completely reversible. We developed this technology to deal with hostile first contacts. It's proven quite effective at preventing misunderstandings." The demonstration lasted only 30 seconds, but it was enough to shatter every assumption the Empire had made about its own technological superiority. The news of humanity's demonstration spread through the Imperial capital like wildfire, carried by encrypted communications that reached every corner of the Empire within hours. On the homeworld of Kepler Prime, the massive towers that housed the Imperial Senate buzzed with activity as emergency sessions were called to address the crisis that no one had seen coming. Senator Vexkala of the Thorian Collective paced nervously. In his private chamber, reviewing the classified reports that had been transmitted from the Emperor's flagship. For 8 centuries, his people had served the Empire faithfully, providing their advanced mathematical abilities to help coordinate the vast bureaucracy that governed 17,000 star systems. But the revelation that humans had been watching and judging the Empire's actions for so long had shaken his faith in imperial supremacy. "The humans know everything," he muttered to his aide, a young Thorian female named Kexmira. "Observing our expansion, our military operations, our treatment of conquered species. They've seen things that even we've tried to forget." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the Empire. On the crystalline worlds of the Silicate Assembly, ancient beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations whispered among themselves about the implications of human technology. In the deep space mining stations operated by the Vorth Collective, workers who had labored for generations under imperial rule began to ask dangerous questions about their future. But nowhere was the crisis more immediate than in the Imperial Palace itself, where Emperor Morvac, the Eternal, sat in his private council chamber. Surrounded by his most trusted advisors, the ancient ruler's cybernetic implants flickered with activity as he processed reports from across the galaxy, each one bringing news of growing unrest and uncertainty. "Your Majesty," reported Intelligence Director Kexera, her voice tight with strain, "we're detecting unauthorized communications throughout the Empire. Multiple member species are attempting to establish contact with human representatives. The Zelkonian Federation has already sent a formal inquiry about alternative governance structures." General Morkith, commander of the Imperial military, slammed his armored fist on the council table. "This is exactly what I warned about. Humans have come here to destroy everything we've built. They're turning our own subjects against us with promises and lies." "Are they lies?" asked Chancellor Vextel quietly. "The technology they demonstrated was real. The star map they showed us was accurate down to the smallest detail. If they truly have the capabilities they claim, then perhaps we should consider their offer seriously." The offer had been delivered during Admiral Jinwu's second meeting with the Emperor, a private audience that had lasted only 20 minutes, but had changed everything. The human admiral had been direct and matter-of-fact, presenting the Empire with 2 clear choices that would determine the future of galactic civilization: integration or isolation. Jinwu had said, his calm voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We can work together to create a more equitable galactic community, one where all species are treated with respect and dignity. Or we can contain your expansion while protecting the species within your borders who wish to leave." The Emperor had asked for time to consider the offer, and Jinwu had agreed without hesitation. "You have 48 standard hours to decide," he had said. "We're not conquerors, Your Majesty. We're gardeners. We prefer to cultivate rather than control. But we won't tolerate the continued oppression of sentient beings in our galaxy."
Oh,
With less than 24 hours remaining, the Empire's leadership was split between those who favored war and those who counseled negotiation. General Morkith and his military advisors argued for immediate preemptive strikes against human installations, convinced that imperial might could overcome any technological advantage. "We have the largest military force in galactic history," Morkith insisted. "Our fleets number in the tens of thousands. Our ground forces have conquered every world they've ever been deployed to. These humans may have advanced technology, but they can't possibly match our numerical superiority." But Intelligence Director Kex Thara's reports painted a very different picture. "General, our analysis suggests that human technology is not just advanced, it's fundamentally different from anything we understand. Their ability to appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning, to disable our technology at will, to remain hidden from our sensors for 8 centuries. These are not mere technological advantages. They represent a completely different approach to physics itself." Chancellor Vextel nodded in agreement. Moreover, General, we must consider the political implications. If we attack the humans and fail, we'll have proven to every species in the galaxy that the Empire is not as invincible as we've claimed. But if we succeed, we'll have destroyed the only force that might be able to teach us how to become something better than what we are. Debate had been raging for hours, with no clear resolution in sight. Some advisors pointed out that the human offer was remarkably generous for a species that clearly held all the strategic advantages. Others argued that accepting any limitation on imperial sovereignty would be tantamount to surrender Emperor. Morvac himself remained silent through most of the discussion, his ancient mind processing possibilities and consequences that his advisors couldn't even imagine. He had ruled for 2 millennia by making decisions that preserved and expanded imperial power. But this decision was different. This choice would determine not just the fate of the Empire, but the kind of civilization that would emerge from the ashes of the old order. As the debate continued around him, the Emperor realized that for the first time in his long existence, he was truly afraid. Not of death or defeat, but of the possibility that everything he had built might have been wrong from the beginning. The announcement came at exactly 47 hours. In 36 minutes after Admiral Jinwu's ultimatum had been delivered, Emperor Morvac, the eternal ruler of 17,000 star systems for over 2 millennia, stood before the assembled representatives of the Imperial Senate and spoke words that would change the course of galactic history forever. "The Empire will integrate," he declared, his ancient voice carrying across the vast chamber with the weight of absolute authority. "We will work with humanity to create a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than conquest." The silence that followed was deafening. Senators who had served the Empire for centuries stared at their ruler in shock, unable to process the magnitude of what they had just heard. General Morkith, commander of the Imperial military, looked as if he had been physically struck. Chancellor Vextel, who had quietly supported negotiation, closed his eyes in relief. The decision had not been easy. The Emperor had spent the final hours of his deadline in private meditation, his cybernetic implants processing millions of possible outcomes and scenarios. In the end, the choice had come down to a simple question. Did he want to be remembered as the ruler who destroyed his empire in a feudal war, or as the leader who transformed it into something greater? 3 months later, the formal ceremony took place on a space station unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had constructed it in just 6 weeks, using technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. The station orbited a neutral star system halfway between human and imperial territory, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of distant suns in patterns that shifted and changed like living art. Emperor Morvac stood at the center of the station's main hall, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of species that had once been subjects of his empire. But today they were not subjects. They were participants in something entirely new. The Galactic Cooperation Accords lay before him on a table made from materials that had been contributed by dozens of different worlds, each one adding something unique to the final design. As he signed his name to the historic document, the Emperor reflected on how much had changed since Admiral Jinwu had first materialized in his throne room. The empire that had once ruled through fear and force was being transformed into something that he was only beginning to understand. The humans had kept every promise they had made, allowing Imperial member species to choose their own futures. For the first time in millennia, the results had been both surprising and enlightening. The Thorian Collective had chosen to remain within the reformed empire, but with guarantees of self-governance that would have been unthinkable under the old system. The Zelkonian Federation had voted to join the expanding Terran Federation, bringing their advanced shipbuilding capabilities to humanity's growing network of allies. Dozens of smaller species had chosen complete independence, establishing their own governments with human protection and support. But perhaps most remarkably, many species had chosen to stay with the Empire, not out of fear, but out of genuine loyalty to the new vision that was emerging. The reformed empire was smaller than it had been, but it was stronger in ways that the old system had never achieved. Admiral Ginwu, now bearing the title of Galactic Liaison, approached the Emperor as the ceremony concluded, exactly as he had during their first meeting. His calm confidence unchanged by the months of complex negotiations that had followed the Empire's decision to integrate. "Your Majesty," Jin Wu said, using the formal title that had been agreed upon during the Accords. "The first joint exploration fleet is ready to depart. Would you like to observe the launch?" The Emperor nodded, and together they walked to the station's observation deck. Through the transparent walls, they could see the assembled fleet preparing for its historic mission. Human vessels, with their elegant, luminescent hulls, flew in formation with imperial dreadnoughts that had been modified with new technology. Ships from a dozen different species that had never worked together before were now united in a common purpose: to explore the galactic core and make contact with whatever civilizations might exist in that distant region. "When we first detected your empire," Jinwu said quietly, his voice carrying a note of reflection, "many of our leaders wanted to simply remove you as a threat. The debate in our councils was intense. Some argued that any species that had conquered and enslaved so many others could never be trusted to change." The Emperor listened without interruption, his ancient mind processing the implications of what he was hearing. "But others believed that redemption was possible," Jinwu continued. "They argued that destruction was easy, but transformation was the harder path. I'm glad we chose the harder path." Emperor Morvac was quiet for a long moment, watching as the joint fleet began its journey toward the galactic core. His cybernetic implants processed the sight of human and imperial vessels working together, their crews communicating in languages that had never been spoken on the same bridges before. "And I am grateful that humanity proved itself more civilized than we ever were," he said finally. "For 2,000 years, I believed that strength came from control, that order could only be maintained through fear. But watching this fleet depart, seeing species that were once enemies working together toward a common goal, perhaps there is something to be learned from being gardeners rather than conquerors." The galaxy that stretched before them was more complex, more diverse, and more alive than anything the Empire had ever created. For the first time in eons, the future held promise rather than merely order. The age of conquest was ending, and the age of cooperation had begun.